May 29, 146 BC. Carthage had fallen after 3 years of siege, and Roman legions moved through the city with terrifying precision. This wasn't the chaotic looting you see in movies. This was something far more disturbing. Order. Officers carried scrolls with quotas and instructions. Scribes set up classification stations in every major square. Within 6 days, they would process 50,000 human beings with the efficiency of a factory operation. 25,000 of them were women. The Romans called it the Harvest Protocol, and that name tells you everything about how they viewed conquered people crops to be gathered rather than human beings with lives and memories. Alyssa stood in line for 7 hours watching the sun move across the sky while soldiers processed women one by one with mechanical routine. Her husband had died defending the walls. Her 12-year-old son had screamed her name when soldiers found him hiding in the cellar. That was the last sound she heard before they dragged her into the street with dozens of other women, the baker's wife, the priest's daughter, neighbors she'd known for years. None looked each other in the eyes because they all knew what was coming. The men above 12 years old were eliminated immediately, not in battle rage or hot blood, but lined up in groups of 50 and removed systematically after they'd surrendered their weapons. The Romans had learned from previous wars that leaving males alive meant rebellions 20 years later. They weren't making that mistake again. But the women faced something entirely different, something worse than death. Systematic erasure designed to transform human beings into blank tools that existed only to serve Rome. When Alyssa's turn arrived, a Roman officer grabbed her jaw and turned her face left, then right. He pried open her mouth to count teeth, squeezed her arms and shoulders, assessed her like livestock at market. Then he wrote 2 words on his wax tablet: prima forma, first quality. She didn't understand Latin. She didn't know those words meant she was worth more, that they meant her suffering would last longer. Young women between 14 and 25 were the premium category, and Roman records from the Carthaginian campaign list exactly 4,200 women in this group, each assigned an identification number, each given a price. These weren't abstract statistics. They were human beings, reduced to entries in ledgers, treated like inventory in economic reports. The efficiency was staggering. 50,000 people processed, registered, categorized, and prepared for distribution across the Mediterranean in less than a week. Enough to fill a modern sports stadium, processed with the cold precision of industrial manufacturing. The classification system was methodical. Officers evaluated age, physical condition, visible defects, potential for labor or reproduction. Women were sorted into categories determining their fate: premium merchandise for wealthy households, agricultural workers for estates, specialized roles for those with particular skills. The process took minutes per person, refined over decades of conquest, into a system so efficient it became the template for slave processing across the empire. 3 days later, Alyssa walked up a wooden plank onto a ship with hands tied by rough rope that had already rubbed her wrists raw. The harbor was chaos. Dozens of ships, thousands of women being loaded like cargo, Roman soldiers shouting orders, smoke still drifting from the burning city. Then she went below deck, where the smell hit first. Sweat, fear, human waste. The air was thick and warm, hard to breathe, even with ventilation. These weren't normal cargo vessels. Archaeological discoveries have revealed something disturbing about their construction. Ventilation shafts running into holds, water supply systems, drainage channels. These ships were built specifically to transport people, designed to keep human cargo alive during weeks-long journeys across the Mediterranean. They were floating prisons engineered for maximum efficiency. Alyssa found a spot against the wall where dozens of women already huddled, some she recognized from her neighborhood. They didn't speak because there was nothing to say. A sailor came down once daily with a bucket of water and a bag of hard bread, never enough for everyone. The Romans designed it that way deliberately by creating scarcity. They created competition, letting prisoners fight among themselves for crumbs while staying too busy to think about resistance. Ship captains kept detailed logs during these voyages, recording the physical condition of their human cargo at regular intervals. Who was getting sick? Who was losing weight? Who was giving up? Around the third week, Alyssa stopped counting days, stopped thinking about Carthage, stopped remembering her son's face. That was the goal. Break them during transport so they arrived already broken. Mortality during transport averaged around 15%. One out of every 7 women loaded onto those ships never reached the other side. The Romans considered this an acceptable loss, just a cost of doing business. Those who died were thrown overboard, their deaths recorded in shipping logs alongside damaged cargo and spoiled supplies. Same column, same bureaucratic indifference. When the ship finally reached Ostia, Rome's main port, Alyssa had been at sea 26 days. She weighed less than she had since childhood. Her wrists were infected where ropes had cut them. But she was alive, and she didn't know yet that being alive was going to be worse. The slave market at Ostia had a smell she would never forget. Oil and perfume used to make merchandise look healthier, sweat from hundreds of bodies packed into holding cells, and something else underneath fear given physical form. Before the auction, they prepared her by stripping off what remained of her Carthaginian clothes and burning them in front of her. They gave her a simple tunic, marking her as property, washed her, fed her just enough to take the edge off her starving appearance, rubbed oil into her skin to make it shine. The auction block was a raised wooden stage in the market center, surrounded by Roman men taking notes, watching, counting coins. The noise was overwhelming, dealers shouting prices, buyers haggling. The constant shuffle of human beings moved from holding pen to holding pen. Alyssa stood there while a dealer grabbed her arm and raised it to show muscle tone, opened her mouth to display teeth, listed her qualities in rapid Latin, while buyers shouted questions. Where is she from? Carthage. Is she trained for household work? Unknown. Is she fertile? Probably. She's young. The bidding started at 15 silver coins and ended at 28. A man in expensive robes walked up, handed over money, and the dealer gave him a receipt, a piece of paper, saying he now owned another human being. Just like that, it was done. Alyssa didn't understand the words being spoken, didn't know how much she'd sold for. She only knew that when the man grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a waiting cart, she was supposed to follow. She was property now, legal property, with all the rights of a chair or cooking pot. The man who bought her didn't look cruel. He didn't look kind either. He looked like someone who'd just completed a transaction. He would never learn her real name, never ask about her family, her home, or her son who screamed for her in that cellar. To him, she wasn't a person with a history. She was an investment, a tool, a thing. That night, Alyssa was given a new name, Tertia. Third, because she was the third slave purchased that week. Everything else about who she used to be began to disappear. They shaved her head on the second day, not as punishment, just procedure. Since new slaves arrived with lice sometimes, and it was easier to shave everyone than check. Alyssa watched her dark hair fall to the stone floor, the same hair her mother used to braid when she was a little girl, gone in 30 seconds. That was only the beginning. Rome had perfected the art of erasing human beings, not killing them, but erasing them, taking everything that made a person who they were and grinding it down to nothing. The process was systematic. First came the name. Alyssa became Tertia, and anyone who called her by her old name was punished. Eventually, she stopped thinking of herself as Alyssa because the name felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who died in Carthage. Then came language. She was forbidden from speaking Punic, her native tongue. Other Carthaginian slaves in the household were kept separate, so there would be no shared language, no shared memory. Then came religion. Her small amulet of Tanit, the goddess her mother had prayed to, was found and destroyed. She was told Roman gods protected this house now, that she would honor them or face consequences. Then came the memories themselves, and this was the cruelest part. Rome didn't just want obedient slaves. They wanted slaves who forgot they had ever been anything else. Tertia was forbidden from talking about Carthage, about her husband, about her son. At first, she held on to those memories desperately, replaying them in her mind at night when no one could see. But years passed, and memories became harder to reach. She would try to picture her son's face and find only fog, try to remember her husband's voice and hear only silence. After 6 years, she realized she had stopped trying. Some women were taken to specialized facilities, places designed for what Roman records called transformation. Archaeological excavations have uncovered these buildings with small rooms containing restraining equipment and drainage systems, evidence of industrial-scale psychological destruction. The programs lasted about 6 months, long enough to ensure pregnancy. Children born from these forced unions became property of the Roman state, living evidence of conquest. Some did not survive infancy if they resembled their mothers too closely. Those who survived were raised as Romans, never knowing their mothers' true names or origins. The system had one goal: complete erasure. Transform a human being with a history, a culture, and a family into a blank tool that existed only to serve Rome. And it worked. 20 years after Carthage fell, Tertia barely remembered the girl who had once been called Alyssa. That person felt like a dream, something that happened to someone else long ago in a city that no longer existed. But here's the darkest truth. Rome didn't do this because Romans were uniquely evil. They did it because they had to. The Roman economy was structurally dependent on slavery at a level few understand. At the empire's peak, between 25 and 40% of the Italian population were slaves. Rome itself had around 400,000 slaves out of 1 million inhabitants. The great agricultural estates that fed the legions ran entirely on slave labor. The mines that produced silver to pay soldiers used slaves until they dropped dead. The aqueducts, roads, and construction projects were all built on disposable human bodies. Without this endless supply of free labor, the entire Roman system would grind to a halt. Here's the problem with disposable bodies. They run out. Slaves died, got sick, aged out of useful labor. The Roman system didn't allow for natural reproduction to replace them fast enough. They needed fresh supplies constantly, which meant they needed new conquests constantly. Every decade without a major war meant fewer slaves entering the market. Fewer slaves meant agricultural crisis. Agricultural crisis meant hungry legions, and hungry legions meant political instability. It was a machine that had to keep feeding or it would collapse. So Rome kept conquering, kept destroying cities, kept processing women and children into the slavery pipeline, not out of sadism, but out of economic necessity. The addiction metaphor isn't poetic exaggeration, it's structural reality. When the conquests finally stopped in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, when borders stabilized and new slaves stopped flowing in, the system began to collapse. Slave prices skyrocketed. Agriculture failed. The empire started transitioning to a different system of tenant farmers bound to land. The end of Roman expansion wasn't just military decline, it was withdrawal. An economy built on human trafficking, learning to live without its fix. The terror created by Roman methods changed everything. Communities across the Mediterranean developed elaborate systems to protect their women. Underground hideouts, networks of caves and tunnels where families could hide during raids. Archaeological discoveries confirm these shelters across former Roman provinces, from Britain to North Africa. Entire villages were redesigned around the possibility of Roman attack, with secret passages built into homes and escape routes planned for every family. Some parents deliberately marked their daughters' faces to make them less attractive to Roman raiders looking for premium merchandise. Marriage traditions changed, with some societies arranging marriages for women at younger ages, believing pregnancy might reduce their value to slavers, and some women chose a different path entirely. When the city of Numantia fell to Rome in 133 BC, the surviving women didn't wait to be processed. They threw themselves from walls and walked into burning buildings, choosing fire over the slave ships. The Romans called it madness. But these women had heard the stories. They knew what waited for them in Ostia, in the markets, in the transformation centers. Death was the only freedom Rome couldn't take away. That choice became a pattern across the Mediterranean. From Spain to Judea, women facing Roman capture made the same calculation. Some poisoned themselves. Some chose to end their family's suffering before it could begin. Not out of despair, but out of defiance. They refused to become inventory. New words entered languages across the Mediterranean, words to describe specific types of Roman cruelty that hadn't needed names before. When entire societies reorganize around protecting women from systematic violence, it means that violence has become a defining element of daily existence. That was Rome's true legacy. Not just the roads and aqueducts, but the fear, the trauma passed down through generations, and the knowledge that civilization itself could become a machine for destroying human beings. Whatever happened to Tertia, the historical record doesn't say. She was one of 25,000, one number among thousands in Roman archives. Her entire existence reduced to a few marks on a wax tablet. Maybe she lived a long life in service to a Roman family. Maybe she died young from disease or exhaustion. Or maybe she eventually earned her freedom as an old woman in a foreign land with no memory of home. We don't know. And that uncertainty is perhaps the cruelest part of all. What we do know is this: she existed. She had a name before they took it, a family before they destroyed it, and a life before Rome decided that life was worth 28 silver coins. And she wasn't alone. Carthage, Corinth, Jerusalem, Numantia, hundreds of cities and hundreds of thousands of women, all fed into the same machine that never stopped, always hungry for more. The glory of Rome was built on this foundation, on suffering and silence. Every aqueduct, every road, every marble temple was built on the backs of people who were never asked if they wanted to contribute. The next time you see a documentary celebrating Roman engineering or military genius, remember this. Remember Alyssa. Remember the ships with their specialized cargo holds. Remember the markets where humans were sold like furniture. And remember that all of it was perfectly legal, perfectly normal, perfectly Roman. If this revelation about Rome's industrial-scale human trafficking system shocked you, subscribe to Medieval Survival, because there are countless similar systems buried in history that never made it into textbooks. Drop a comment telling me which empire's hidden atrocities you want exposed next. Your suggestions shape what comes next on this channel. Share this with anyone who thinks ancient Rome was all aqueducts and philosophy. The women were real. The suffering was real. The system was real. And they deserve to be remembered.